like to call to order the City of Chaska Planning Commission meeting, September 14th, 2022. Now called to order. Nate, would you do the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Riley?
Here.
Commissioner Gari?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Assen?
Here.
And Chair Lacey?
Here.
Tonight, absent are Commissioners Baswa, Urbanski, and Commissioner Brass.
Thank you. First item up is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting, and I'll be happy to receive a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Commissioner Olson, motion.
Second.
Commissioner Gori, second. All in favor, let it be known. Let it be known by saying aye.
Yes.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Next, any visitor presentations for tonight? Okay, barring none, we will move ahead to approve the previous meeting minutes from August 10th. Get a motion to adopt and approve those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the August meeting.
Commissioner Asan, and a second.
I'll second.
Commissioner Olson, second. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Consent items, recommending the approval of the final plat for Hidden Maples Landmark Builders, PC 2022-53. First, I'll ask if there's any further discussion amongst the commission.
I just have one. Nate, I know when it came through preliminary, this one had the item to make sure it matched or at least felt in line with the neighborhood, and they showed one change to one of the houses, but nothing to the other three. So what's basically being required here for them, and what's going to be basically the checkpoint to make sure that actually happens for all four houses?
Liz, is that one that you're able to chime in? I know you've worked a little closer with that.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we only have one design in front of us, just with one of the houses, and we'll work with the developer on the remaining three. The tricky part that we get into on the front end of things is they don't always have those floor plans and house plans fully defined at the final plat stage. It's as they get their client in. So we do have basically to review as they come in to see how they line up with the other homes in the neighborhood. And as we stated before, we don't have an ordinance that really dictates that we can firmly control the design of the homes that come in, but we'll still work with the developer to try to work on the elements to fit them in as best as we can. So they did.
Liz, you froze. Maybe we'll give her a moment to see if it catches up, but I can make a guess as to where maybe she was going. So I think maybe where she was going is we have had some back and forth with the developer on the design. We've talked about, you might recall when they came through preliminary, I think it was last month or maybe 2 months ago, there were some more peaked roofs that as it approached, the street side, caused the height to feel, pretty stark. We've worked with them to try and soften that by angling the peak of the roof in the example that you see here. But to Liz's point, with this being, you know, custom homes, or there's a palette of homes that will be available to you know, the folks who ultimately buy and build. It's not infrequent where there are changes being made, and we're working with developers on you know, design and things all the way up until the point that it's actually being built. And there are limitations in our ordinance as it currently stands as to how far we can really push. Now, we always try to work with them, and we appreciate when the developers are willing to, you know, hear staff's recommendations and ideas and try to incorporate things and be as, you know, mindful of the surroundings in the neighborhood that they're going into, especially in a situation like this. But from a, you know, legal perspective, there are limitations on how far we can really require and push that. So we are working with them. We have been putting ideas forward. I know Liz has gone back and forth and provided examples, you know, of things that would help, and some, you know, design approaches and things like that. And I, you know, expect we'll continue to do that all the way through.
Okay. I was just surprised that was coming through with final with, I mean, with only one example of making adjustments to the facades of the house, so that was an understanding what requirements, because it was a requirement, a condition for the approvals, and they haven't necessarily met those conditions to come through final. And knowing that it doesn't come back again, how's it going to make sure it actually follows through with those conditions that were set?
Any other discussion?
Yeah, I was just wanting a status update on the replacement of Fireman's Park 2 with St. John's. Has there been any progress?
That is an item really for the Parks Board to be working on. I know that everyone feels that it's a priority, but as far as I know, we're still working on reigniting those conversations. So, yeah.
Okay. So, for the action item, recommending approval of zoning ordinance amendment ZOA to zoning section 15.8, administration and enforcement of Chaska PC 20, I'm sorry, I'm on the consent item. Recommend approval of the final plat for Hidden Maples Landmark Builders PC 2022-53. Can I get a motion to recommend approval for this?
Well, I tell you, I voted no on the concept. I'm gonna vote no on the final.
Okay.
And that's really, it's not the developer's issue, but it's that park issue. And that update was disappointing. And so it's, I think that's a failure of the city staff to not make any progress on it. You know, I do feel that, you know, eliminating a park is a big deal. As a community, it impacts people. And, you know, they're not here, you know, making an uproar and an outcry about it, but, yeah, I think that's as their peer representatives, I think that's our role. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay.
And that's why.
All right. Motion, request for a motion still stands. All right, so Nate, a little help here when we.
Well, there needs to
Absent a
be a motion of some sort. So it could be a motion for approval,
Or,
it could be a motion for denial, in which case
Or
you need to
denial.
state the reasons for denial. It could be a motion to table, but I would recommend you also state the reasons to table, because there needs to be direction given on what is being worked on. And in that case, it would need to pertain to the application itself.
okay. So we have three choices: approval, denial, or tabling. So a smorgasbord of options there. Let me again ask for a motion to proceed with some type of decision on this recommendation or denial?
I'll make a motion to table this for 1 month for the developer to come back with final plans for all 4 houses, to coincide with the condition of meeting or falling in line with the neighborhood that was part of condition and preliminary.
All right, we have a motion to table this for a month to give the developer an opportunity to come back and articulate what, plans are being done in line with, the requirements, or can I get a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
All right, motion by Olson, second by Gory. All those in favor of tabling this for a month, let it be known by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, motion is passed to table this for a month to give the developer an opportunity to come back and make clear their plans on replacing the park. Is that?
No, the 4 houses.
The 4
house
houses.
design.
All right. Okay, now, our action item of the night, public hearing, recommend approval of zoning ordinance amendment to section 15.8, administration and enforcement, City of Chaska, PC 2022-49. And Nate, I will turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Just gonna bring up my slides here.
We have nothing on this monitor here,
There's nothing up front.
nothing up front.
We don't get the job of seeing this.
We didn't get to see Liz frozen.
I wonder if I can flip.
Is it on?
Does that work?
Yeah,
Do you want me to flip that one too?
No, I
that's fine.
Okay. All right. Okay. So Commissioners, this item pertains to a proposed ordinance amendment that relates to the joint work session that was held, when was that? Back in May, I believe, to talk about changes that could be implemented to improve the approach that we take towards engaging the public and raising awareness around developments that are proposed in the community. So a little bit of background. It was July 18th when the joint work session, time does funny things, when the joint work session was held, and that was with City Council and Planning Commission. I think you were all able to attend in some way, but to remind you, the things that we generally covered there was we reviewed the current requirements and practices that are used to provide information to the public, to raise awareness with the public about proposals as they come in. We discussed challenges that exist with the current framework. Staff presented findings of peer communities. So there was research done of multiple communities throughout the Twin Cities Metro, and also Rochester was part of that as well, to learn about their practices and how we compare. And then we discussed and developed consensus on recommendations for implementation. So recommendations for implementation, really tonight, the things that we're proposing focus on those. We kind of, if you might remember, we broke it into 2 phases. Items that would take a little bit more time and items that could be done a little bit more immediately. So this is really that phase 1 component of what was presented and recommended. So what we're looking at are signs on proposed development sites and implementing that requirement for developers, require developer neighborhood meetings before the concept submission occurs. Whereas today, we encourage those meetings. They tend to happen at various phases in the process, sometimes before concept submission, sometimes after, sometimes not at all, because we don't have that requirement. Increase mailing notification boundary to 500 feet You might recall that today, by and large, is 350 feet. There are some variations in there, but as practice, we do 350 feet. And then also changing ordinance to reflect these new requirements. So that's what we're talking about here. So again, these are the recommendations that we talked about in phase 1, which again is the focus for tonight. Those development signs, you might recall that these were some examples that were provided for you all at that time. So the proposed ordinance change is to Chapter 15.08. Public hearings would be required for, as a result of this change, zoning ordinances and amendments, conditional use permits, and variances. The public hearing notice would be sent to all properties within 500 feet of the proposed project site via mail, which is above and beyond what state statute requires in these situations. I've got an example template here of a postcard that we've now developed, whereas before it's been a form letter sent in an envelope. What we've found as a city on our communications, not just on public hearing notices, is that envelopes often get in the way. It's not uncommon that folks will receive it in the mail, consider it junk mail, and toss it before even looking at it. And the lesson that we've learned, and this is really at Kevin Wright's guidance, who's our communications manager, in order to throw away a postcard, you at least have to look at it, is what he will say. And so we've moved to a postcard format, and you can see here approximately, well, not approximately, how it will look. The intention with this portion on this side of the postcard is that we would insert a site map there in color. So hopefully that grabs a person's attention, helps them orient where the project is in relation to them. And so this hopefully will help more clearly communicate to folks about the public hearings and also grab their attention a little bit better. We are set to start deploying this the next time that we do a mailing. Also in this proposed changes are requirements for neighborhood meetings. So neighborhood meetings would be required for site plan review, conditional use permits, variances, concept plan for a new planned development district, amendment for a planned development district, preliminary plat, rezoning, a text amendment to a zoning ordinance, which that would be in the situation of a developer's request. Think about like tonight we're doing a zoning ordinance amendment. We're not suggesting that we hold a full-out neighborhood meeting of the whole community for something like that in all cases. Some situations it may make sense though. And amendments to the current comprehensive plan at the developer's request. Again, this is a situation where a development is causing a need for an amendment to the comprehensive plan. There are other situations where the city may be in a position where we're trying to implement a change and a neighbor, it's at a scale that may be citywide, and so a neighborhood meeting isn't necessarily the approach in that situation. We do a full revision of the comp plan every 10 years, and there's a very big public process that goes into all of that. This is not intended to speak to those situations. Neighborhood meeting requirements are that it would happen, the neighborhood meeting would happen no more than 6 months prior to submission of the concept plan. It would happen during the hours of 6 to 9 p.m. on a Monday through Friday, and exceptions could be made. So the reason we're doing that is we don't want the developer to set a meeting at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, right, when a lot of people are probably busy with work. We do have in the language the ability to make exceptions, because we also recognize that in the situation like, I don't know, a change is occurring, maybe an expansion to an industrial building up in the North Industrial Park. The neighbors there are primarily the other industrial users, right? And so the best time for them probably is that maybe at 10 a.m. or over a lunch on a weekday, because that's when the employees are there and the management is there to be involved. So we do allow for that discussion in the ordinance change with staff to occur, so that if it's justifiable and it makes sense for that neighborhood, that we would move off of that 6 to 9, but otherwise that would be the requirement. There's also an exception where the neighborhood might request, it works better for us to do it on a Saturday morning at 9 or something like that. If they're requesting that, by all means, we're not going to require them to do something that they're not wanting. Notice would be required to be mailed by the developer to all addresses within that 500-foot boundary, just like we would for all the other notices, to the neighborhood association, also to the zoning administrator, the planning commission, and the council. Now, those notices may not come to you via mail. We would work with the developer and provide you that notice, maybe via email. But the intention there is that you know that the meeting is happening, so that if you start getting emails and questions or things like that, it's not coming out of nowhere for you. You know that this meeting has occurred. Okay, I understand why I'm getting these questions now. And then in the meeting, ordinance requires that some basic guidelines around what the meeting is supposed to do. So explain the proposal, answer questions. That's the developer's job, is to answer questions that neighborhood residents are bringing up, and discuss ways to resolve those concerns. So we're wanting that dialogue to occur. I think we all need to be mindful and expect that sometimes the neighborhood's desires and concerns are going to be things that maybe can't be resolved in that meeting. That's why we have the process, and we work through that. But at least they need to be acknowledged, and we want the developer to take them seriously and begin to think about how they're going to move towards responding to some of those things, or at least be able to explain, why that's not going to work. We need to have that dialogue. Post-meeting requirements are discussed in this ordinance as well. So we look for a summary of the neighborhood meeting will be required for applications submitted to the zoning administrator. So that would be an expectation requirement as part of that submission into the concept plan review, for example, that there is a summary of that neighborhood meeting talking about when it was held, how many people attended, the location of it, what was discussed, the questions that were asked and how they were responded to. And then we're also going to be expecting that the developer is talking about how their submission is incorporating what was discussed at that meeting. And that would be necessary for a complete application. So for an example, if a developer were to submit an application for concept review and it doesn't have a full summary, or a meeting didn't occur within the guidelines of the ordinance, without that exception, discussion being had and being agreed to, staff would have grounds to say your application is not complete. You need to do these things before we're going to bring your application forward to the Planning Commission and the council. So moving on to another topic, signage. This is, the ordinance change will require that all applications, I don't know why I have neighborhood meeting, that they will display a proposed development sign on the site, and that would be along all the public streets that abut the property, or maybe go through a property. That's possible as well. There is language in the ordinance that would require that they be every 500 feet along that property. So if it's a large neighborhood site proposal, that might be a situation where you may even have multiple signs along a single roadway frontage. They need to be installed prior to the Planning Commission review. So we will receive that application, go through the process of determining that it's complete. That would be the thing that would then trigger us to go forward and put those signs up. And there's a pretty tight window in there, but that will be the goal that staff is working towards, is to have those signs in place before it's being heard for concept review by the Planning Commission. And then the developer will be charged a fee to offset signage cost, installation, and removal. This graphic that you see here is the intended design of the sign. This is very similar to what Chanhassen uses. In fact, it's, I don't know if there's copyright law. I'm lucky that copyright law doesn't apply to government because we may be in a situation, but it's very similar. The reason why is we've received good feedback from a lot of people about how they appreciate Chanhassen signs, how they're easy to read, they grab your attention, they direct you to easy locations to go get more information, and it's worked well for them. It's also one where we played around with, do we get more specific information on here about, when a meeting is occurring, the name of the development, things like that. The challenge with that is the reusability of the signs. And our desire here is to, over time, I think we'll have, a number of signs that are available. Sometimes they'll be out there long enough that they'll weather and they will only last for one application, but other times they won't. And we'll be able to reuse them, and we want to take advantage of that opportunity when that's available. One thing that we've talked about as we're developing, and this is sort of a phase 2 thing, we are working to develop proposed development landing page on our website. So someone could go to that place and see all the developments that are currently in process, which stage they're at, click into it and get more details about that specific development. I think once that's developed, there's an opportunity there that we may be able to add maybe a more specific website location or even a QR code to the sign that would then land people on that page, and then they have more direct access to that information. We don't want to provide that until it's ready, though. I don't want to put a QR code out there that brings somebody to nothing. And so that's why we've stopped at this for now. It's easy to make changes to this sign design, and it's easy to get new signs made as that opportunity presents itself. So those are all the changes that are being proposed through the ordinance in front of you tonight. I do want to take this opportunity to give you some updates on the other recommendations for the phase 2 items that we discussed at the work session. So I don't want to confuse things, but I do want to provide you that opportunity. So I don't know if you've got any questions about the ordinance changes that we discussed. Otherwise, I can dive into the update here on that phase 2 piece.
The phone number, Nate, the 9200 phone number?
Yep.
So that goes to the, main phone attendant?
Yep.
So that person will have to direct them to you or Liz?
They would send them to Liz or me.
Okay, and they're prepared to do that when somebody calls, kind of a little?
They do that all the time today.
Questioning
It's
or
not an
confused?
unusual thing.
Okay.
Yep, yep. In fact, the folks who typically receive these calls, it depends on if a break's occurring or whatever, but they sit right next to Liz and I in the office area, so yeah, they know what we're up to. Yep.
Part of I like the fact that we're putting the requirement for the meeting and the post-meeting, I'll say write-up. If that doesn't necessarily meet the standards from, I'll say your seat, as into, yep, they had the meeting, yep, they provided a 3-bullet point, even though there was 10 people there. Is there, I don't say quality control, but they're, versus just checking the box, is they're making sure it's actually meaningful and useful to what they're presenting?
Mm-hmm.
Because I see that as a good thing and holding the developer accountable, but if they're just going to send back a 3-bullet point, PDF based on a half-hour meeting or an hour meeting with 10 residents, where's just the check the box versus something that's actually going to be meaningful and useful?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that something that you can push back on,
Well,
even though they're coming back and say, we had the meeting, here's our write-up?
Yep.
But if there's no standards on what is expected, and granted, we know it's variable, if there's no issues, if there's plenty of issues, there's 1 or 10 people,
Yep.
where's that line of expectations of that post-meeting, I'll say, write-up?
Mm-hmm. I guess I'd start off by saying there is language in the ordinance that's being proposed that explicitly states there's nothing that prevents the I think it says planning commission or council from requiring another neighborhood meeting. So I think that gives you an opportunity also, right, as you're going through that concept review and, residents are coming and you're sort of sensing that folks aren't being heard correctly and there's more need for more discussion, to recommend to council or, that there be another neighborhood meeting held. So there's that opportunity. I also think from a staff perspective, and crafting an ordinance perspective also, we're looking at it, and like you said, there's a broad array of possibility here. I think there's going to be, and we've seen it, there's plenty of situations where you see a proposal and there aren't a lot of neighbors in that area, or what's being proposed people are excited about, or maybe they really don't have any opinion about it at all, right? And so in that case, it's going to be a pretty short and brief, summary there. And I know there's neighborhood meetings that occur now where only 1 or 2 people show up, and it's just kind of ends up being more of a conversation about good fishing spots than anything else, right? And so that will happen. And so it's hard to require a length on the meeting or a number of pages on a report or something like that. I think it really kind of ends up being a lot of discretion that needs to be applied and judgment
But
in order to determine and understand, right, how is this meeting being received by the neighborhood, conversations with the developer to understand how did you approach the meeting. Staff typically have a pretty good sense as to, is this going to be a controversial one or not?
but what about just a basic template based on your requirements?
Yep, and that's something that's one of those phase 2 items too,
Okay.
was to develop a handbook for developers about best practices. What is a good way to get your notice out? What is a good way to go about holding a meeting? A template for recording the meeting and things like that. We do have, specific items in the ordinance that says what they need to cover in their report. So that does give us the ability to say, well, hey, you didn't cover this. Or if there's, if they're reporting that there was no Q&A, to me that's a red flag to staff to go, okay, you're saying there was no Q&A in this meeting. That's pretty unusual. Help me understand that. And we can have that discussion. And if it's coming across pretty clear that they didn't really put a good foot forward, there is opportunity for staff to say, no, this is incomplete. You need to go out and attempt this meeting again. Come back with something
I
that
like it.
feels a little bit more
I
thorough.
think it gives an opportunity for a lot of concerns, answers to questions to happen way before it gets here for first airing. And although the requirement is all on the developer to follow these functions before they submit, I think it's incumbent for the residents to attend. You can't make them attend, but I think at the same time, as we're educating developers, residents need to be educated as to the process and how this can benefit them to get involved in this process from the beginning, instead of waiting for this to happen and then we get here and all of a sudden, you have all of these concerns which could have been addressed and perhaps answered and resolved back here. So I like it, but I think there also needs to be an education of residents also to let them know why their participation is important to make this work. Without it, it's not. It's just a great plan.
Yep.
So along those lines, are we able, so when this notice comes out, is there the ability to have just a brief outline of what the process is so that somebody understands when they get this postcard that, it goes through concept, it goes through preliminary, then final, that this isn't, a one kick at the can, process. And I think it's, like you say, it's the lack of understanding of that process that creates angst. Maybe that could be something to incorporate somehow. Just an
Yeah, I think
educational
we can
element of
continue to look at the postcard and the
Inside.
information that we're including there and how do we most effectively get across the right message. In addition to that, we're really focusing a lot of our discussion right now on building that website presence also, and I think there's a lot of potential within that for us to be able to design that so that when a project is proposed, it's getting its dedicated page. We can have, we're talking about how do we maybe create some sort of graphic or something on there that helps illustrate the full process and then where it's at. You kind of think of like,
just
I don't know,
a
like
flow
there's
chart.
those thermometers that you see for fundraising things, you know, something like that, right? Where you can kind of see how it's progressing.
Sure.
It may be worthy of a public meeting up at the community center, you know, with an article in the Herald, so, you know, they can get it because, you know, people are concerned. There's a lot of development going on in Chaska, so people are, you know, waiting for the other shoe to drop when it comes, you know, to their street or their neighborhood.
Yep.
And I think a couple of public meetings, so the education part can happen there and then be, you know, backed up with communications on these postcards. I like the postcard idea because, yeah, you're right. You do have to look at it before you talk.
Yep. Yep. And I think as those development pages get created, we'll be able to put, you know, a link to that on the postcard, which will help people get that more detailed information. There's a balance between how much, you know, how much can you fit on the postcard and how much can we really send out. And so, yeah, I mean,
QR code.
yeah,
Big QR code.
put it all in fine print. I don't know, but I also think I fully expect that we're going to learn some stuff here, right? And we'll put this postcard out. We'll see how people respond. We'll probably, you know, get some good feedback and say, yeah, you know, we hadn't thought about it that way. So, you know, let's make that change, which is easy to do. I also fully expect that as, you know, assuming this ordinance change gets approved and enacted, we're going to hold a few neighborhood meetings and we're going to learn some stuff through that too. And maybe we come back and say, okay, we've learned enough now that we want to refine the ordinance a little bit further, which we can do. And so I think, at least the way I look at it, this feels like a good start and a good place to launch. And we'll learn some things and we'll keep trying to keep an eye towards improvement. I can tell you the ordinance language that we're grabbing here is not coming out of thin air. It's coming from other communities that have ordinances like this in place. This one is very much patterned after Shakopee. We did look at some others as well. But Shakopee just recently went through a very similar process. They're maybe a year or two into it, where they started requiring neighborhood meetings and things like that. So I was able to talk to their community development director. He said for them it's been working pretty well with the language that they have forward. It's not verbatim. We Chaska-tized it a little bit. But I think it's good to understand that there's someone else using a very similar approach, and at least from their perspective, they've seen it as beneficial.
I've seen the Chanhassen sign coming off of 212 there. It stands out.
It's hard to miss it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good change, and, you know, specifically on the, you know, the meeting notice. I mean, the postcard's good, and then the post write-up, and, you know, being able to provide that back to not just us, but then also to the neighbors as well, too, as into, it's like, this is what the developer has submitted as what actually happened in the meeting, and, you know, at concept, if there's disputes as into what the developer brought forward versus what the neighbors actually think they said or what they said during the meeting, we can address that at concept as well too, because being part of quite a few neighborhood meetings over the last few years, I wish that was in place, because that would have both informed the commission and council as well as level set everything from the beginning versus the he said, she said, you know, and deal with that, you know, going forward. So, you know, it's definitely a good step forward, you know, across the board. And it puts the developer on the hook for presenting full information to us at concept versus, I'll kind of go back to the half-baked plan. It's like, well, it can't be, you know, half-baked. It's got to get farther along for them to at least bring it to concept as well too, and that's part of it as well. So that's good.
Okay, well, any other discussion? not,
Was
I'll
there, I'm sorry, was there more
Yeah.
presentation or?
Yeah, there's a little bit more
Okay.
to provide some update on some of these other items, kind of where we're going. So, and some of this, I guess we've maybe just sort of organically touched on. But I wanted to give you where we're at on some of these phase 2 items. We're not sitting idle on those either. So we've talked about the development proposal web pages on the city website. Our intention is, like I mentioned earlier, that we will have a landing page for proposed developments, and then from there, link to project-specific pages where we would show where projects are at in the process, define who the applicant is, provide access to documents, summary of the approvals received, things like that. And so it really kind of becomes that definitive library, so to speak, of that project. Whereas today, for anyone, and sometimes including myself, to try and find the documents for a particular project, you've got to know which agenda item it was on, the date that it was there, in order to really drill in and get those documents through our website. This will bring all that to the forefront and just give you that immediate, link for that project if you're wanting to follow it. We're also looking at, and I can't make a promise now, but it's a question we're looking into, whether there's an opportunity to create sort of an email listserv specific to a page, or maybe the development landing site as a whole. We're trying to figure that out. But so if someone's interested in developments in general or a specific development, my hope is that we can figure out a way that you could sign up and just submit your email address so that as things are added to that page, it just triggers that automatic update. Hey, XYZ's been updated. You might want to go check it out. So we're looking at that and trying to figure out whether that's going to be an opportunity with the website that we have. So that's the development website. We're also looking at and actively developing a GIS map. So that would be interactive. And I've got a screenshot here, and it's pretty rudimentary at this point, but we're calling it the Development Hub. And these are just some made up dots right now, just kind of testing it out. But the idea is that we would place dots where there's a proposed development, and the user would be able to zoom in and see the site. Also click on that dot, and there'd be a pop-up that would come up. You get some very basic information. What's the name of the project? Who's the developer? Basic description of it. Maybe a couple other details, but then trying to drive people to that that development page, or the page that's specific to that proposal, and then they can really dive in and get the details on it. In the full version, our intention is that there will be a menu bar on the side of the page that will have icons associated with each of the developments as well, and we're even trying to figure out how do we use maybe a combination of colors and how we symbolize things to hopefully make it more apparent to folks as to where it's at in the process. Is it concept, preliminary, final, those sorts of things. There's also an opportunity here to use this not only for developments that are being proposed, but once they've been approved and they're into development, to continue to track that and provide information. So a couple examples that stick out to me would be things like Hy-Vee or Chaska that have had approval for some time, but the developers are still working through things, or Hy-Vee has made some other decisions, right? We can provide that information too, so that people have another point of access to that information as we understand it. So that's that GIS map and where we're going with that. Our intention before we launch it would be to share what we would call a close to final, version with you all and the council, let you play around with it a little bit as a user, and, provide us some feedback too that, maybe we might make a few more tweaks before we make it go live. And then there's also that best practices guide manual, which kind of gets to what Commissioner Gorey was talking about, trying to put forward something that gives developers some, at least minimal guidance, baseline guidance as to how to hopefully set them up for some success with those neighborhood meetings. And so that's in process as well. So for tonight, it's really that phase one piece. And so the recommended action would be a motion to recommend adoption to the city council of ordinance number 1021, approving the zoning ordinance amendment to chapter 15.08. This would then, if planning commission wants to move that direction, go to city council at its next meeting next Monday, September 19th. There's a public hearing that needs to be held, so that'll need to be part of your process tonight as well. Any further questions of me?
I like everything I see. I'm really happy to see you moving forward with this initiative, Nate. And it's really, it's important, and it's a great improvement, for the community and the process. For the phase two, items there, I just put a plug in for social media, and we're not an analog world anymore. We're a digital world, and we've all kind of seen the evolution of social media, and we all understand it now. And I don't think it's something to be afraid of. And I think that there's a number of outlets there, where our agenda items or the city council or the park board's agenda items can just be communicated in fact. Like this is happening in the community, and there's people that troll. There's going to be, on one side or the other, just some really extreme things, comments that happen. But I think just as a community and as people, we all understand that happens. That's part of social media. It's all that discussion in the middle that I think is healthy, and I think our community would benefit from allowing that to happen a little more often, within the social media sphere, because people are busy, but they have their phones in their hands, and that's where they want to interact with the world, and I think that we would get more feedback, more sense or flavor of kind of where the constituents are at. That would help the process. So just my plug in that regard.
Yep, that's a valid point.
Very true.
Yep, we've been building those tools. So yeah, there's a number of apps and things, and yeah, I think we would seek to continue to figure out how do we best utilize that for these situations too. Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Any other discussion? Well, with that, I'd like to get a motion to recommend.
Thank you. Just you have to do the public hearing.
Yep, public hearing.
Do
Good
we,
catch. Thank you.
There's nobody in.
Yeah.
Anybody
So you'll
waiting?
need to open the public hearing and state the time.
Public hearing open at 7:48. And ask if, do we have anyone waiting online?
I don't see anybody.
I don't see anyone.
Okay. Well, to be respectful, I'll just say closing public hearing at, 7:48, open and close. So now we'll proceed to a motion to adopt the phase one of the notification. Can you put that back up?
Yep, yeah, I will. One moment here. Is that showing up?
Yeah, motion to approve adoption to the City Council of Ordinance 1021, approving the zoning ordinance amendment to Chapter 15.08. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Commissioner
Or
Rowley,
recommend.
motion.
Second.
Commissioner Arson, second. All those in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign, motion passes. Okay, on to any other business that anyone would like to bring up?
One update I have for you all, I think it was the last meeting, I mentioned some discussions that I'd had with a person who does trainings on, for various boards and public bodies about sort of role, the basics of, in this case, a planning commission. There's things like data practices and open meeting law and kind of that stuff, and trying to provide some of that base level information for everyone. I think it's good as a refresher if you're already feeling comfortable with it from time to time, but also for folks who are newer to this sort of thing, it can be pretty enlightening. And so I've had some more follow-up conversation. She has a proposal in front of me, kind of outlining the time and how it would be used. But from a timing perspective, the thought that she and I were discussing, and I want to share it with you and get your feedback if you have any, would be to really wait until probably around February of next year. Just knowing that we have an opening on the Planning Commission right now. As we move into the year, there may be more that open up, and anticipating then that in January is the typical process that council goes through to make those appointments to fill those spots. So we would have some fresh folks, just a few months from now. It seems like it makes sense that we would just hold off until February-ish, and provide that opportunity then, so that you all can kind of start the year on with that opportunity for you. If you feel like we need to take a different direction than that, I can certainly talk to her and see if her schedule would allow for something sooner. But that was sort of the thought process that I wanted to share.
Seems reasonable.
Okay, all right.
All right. And item 9, acknowledge receipt of city council meetings of August 1st and EDA draft meeting minutes. Acknowledge receipt of those. And we'll go around before we adjourn. Anybody have any other comments or items they'd like to put forward? Well, with that, no tornado warnings. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Arson
Second.
and Commissioner Olson second. All those in favor, let be known by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, pass. Thanks, everybody.